She explained the Veth in 23 minutes, which Elias privately thought was impressive given the subject matter. They were, she told them, not simply old. They were architecturally old, in a way that had no human equivalent. Their elder caste didn't just possess historical knowledge the way humans possessed it, as learned data stored in biological memory. The Veth experienced history as continuous sensation. Their elders carried 40,000 years of experiential memory as something functionally indistinguishable from lived personal experience. They didn't remember their first contact with humanity. They felt it, constantly, layered over present moment perception, like a transparency. What that means for us, Mara said, is that when a Veth elder looks at a human being, they're not seeing a person. They're seeing a data point against 40,000 years of comparative species assessment. They've met a lot of species. They've categorized all of them. And they have never, she paused for emphasis, been surprised. You think they'll be surprised by us? One of the Marines asked. I think, Mara said, that they've already been surprised by us and don't know it yet. She pulled up a file. 3 weeks ago, I found something in the language matrices. A fragment of what the Veth call their excluded record. Classified internal archive material that their diplomatic team transmitted by accident during the initial exchange. Or possibly they didn't know it was embedded in the transfer packet. Either way, she tapped the screen. I've been working through it ever since. The screen filled with Veth script, a flowing, three-dimensional written language that looked like architecture and moved like water. The Veth, she said, have a designation for humanity that predates first contact by 11,000 years. Not our official Category 7 classification. An older designation, one they've been using in internal records since before we had written language. She highlighted a cluster of symbols. In the most accurate translation I can construct, it reads, "The ones who survived what ended everyone else." The room was quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when everyone in them is processing something large. Elias leaned forward slightly. Explain that. She did. And what she explained rewrote 11,000 years of human history in about 15 minutes. The excluded record described an event of Veth called the Silence, a cascading sequence of extinction-level catastrophes that had moved through this arm of the Milky Way approximately 11,000 years before the present day. Not a single event, but a chain reaction, a stellar phenomenon, possibly a gamma-ray burst sequence, that had destabilized planetary systems across a 400 light-year radius. The Veth had survived it because their home system was at the edge of the affected zone. Barely. Everything inside that zone had not survived. 17 spacefaring civilizations, gone. 12 pre-spacefaring civilizations that the Veth had been monitoring and expected to achieve interstellar travel within a few thousand years, gone. Every inhabited world within that radius, scrubbed clean by radiation, orbital disruption, or the cascading atmospheric collapse that followed. Except one. Sol 3, Mara said. Earth, which was, at the time, populated by anatomically modern humans in the late Neolithic period. Stone tools. Fire. Early evidence of agricultural development beginning to emerge in certain river valleys. A total global population estimated between 1 and 5 million individuals. She paused. By every metric the Veth used to assess pre-spacefaring civilizations, we were the least significant species in the affected zone. But we made it, Elias said. We made it, she confirmed. And the Veth have been carrying that data point in their excluded record for 11,000 years without ever formally analyzing why. Why is it excluded? Cricket asked. Why classified? Mara hesitated, and it was the first time he'd seen her hesitate. Elias noticed. Because, she said carefully, the Veth classification system has no category for what we represent. A Category 7 species that survived an extinction event that eliminated civilizations operating at Category 5, 6, even low-range Category 8. It breaks their model. She looked at the screen. The easiest solution, bureaucratically, was to classify it and not discuss it. And you're going to discuss it, Elias said. She looked at him. There was something in her expression, not quite a smile, but the shape of one, something compressed and determined, and just slightly warmer than the professional register she'd been operating in. I'm going to do more than discuss it, she said. I'm going to make them look at it. The convocation was held aboard the Veth flagship Ancestral Permanence, a vessel 6 kilometers long that generated its own internal gravity and maintained a breathable atmosphere that smelled faintly of copper and pine resin. The corridors were high enough to land a commercial aircraft in and lit by bioluminescent panels that cycled through colors on a 26-hour schedule that presumably corresponded to some Veth circadian rhythm. The human delegation moved through it in a cluster of 12 soldiers and 1 civilian, surrounded by a Veth escort detail that was polite in the way that very large, very old things are polite when dealing with something they could step on. The convocation chamber itself made every human-built space feel provisional. Elliptical, roughly the size of a football stadium, tiered seating that curved upward on all sides to accommodate the biological diversity of 400 species. Some needing pressurized environments, some requiring gravity adjustments, some existing in spectra of light invisible to human eyes. The air was thick with translation system chatter as the room's processing architecture simultaneously rendered every utterance into every registered species language. Earth's delegation was seated in the observer gallery, non-voting, non-speaking. The placard on their section, in standard galactic, read, Category 7. Ceremonial attendance. No floor privileges. Elias stood at parade, rest behind the diplomatic row, watching everything, touching nothing. To his left, Cricket was doing the same with slightly more visible skepticism. To his right, the Space Force specialist had her tablet out and was recording atmospheric and gravitational readings with the quiet dedication of someone who understood that this was, objectively, the most scientifically significant moment in human history and intended to document every second of it. The High Archivist opened the session. It was a being that resembled, loosely, impressionistically, if you squinted, a 5-foot arrangement of translucent geometric crystal forms connected by threads of blue-white bioluminescence, suspended 3 feet above its speaker's platform by what Mara had explained was a localized gravitational field. When it spoke, the sound came from everywhere at once, like the room itself was talking. The 4,400 Galactic Convocation is convened. All designated delegates are recognized. Observer species are reminded of their non-participatory status. The first order of business. Mara stood up. Every muscle in Elias's body went from parade rest to ready in about a quarter of a second. Around him, he felt his detail do the same. That subtle, full-body tension of trained people registering an unexpected variable. The chamber noticed. The translation chatter dropped. 400 alien species turned their various sensory apparatus toward the small human woman standing in the observer gallery. Category 7 observer, the High Archivist said, in a tone that translated precisely as measured astonishment. You do not have floor privileges. I understand that, Mara said. Her voice was steady, completely steady, which Elias noted with a kind of internal recognition. The particular calm of someone who's already made peace with how this might go. I'd like to invoke Article 17 of the Convocation Charter. The murmur that moved through the chamber was audible even through the translation system's filtering. Article 17, the High Archivist said, pertains exclusively to species with verified historical standing before this body. Category 7 species have no verified standing. I know, Mara said. I'd like to change that, and I'd like to do it on the record, with the full chamber present, because what I have to present concerns every species in this room. She held up her data chip. I found something in your excluded record, something you classified 11,000 years ago, and I think it's time to look at it. Silence. Not the conversational silence of a pause between sentences. The structural silence of a vast room full of ancient beings collectively holding whatever biological process served them as breath. The excluded record, the High Archivist said, very quietly, is classified by authority of the Veth Elder Council. Yes, Mara said, and I'm asking that authority to review that classification. Right now, in front of everyone. She paused, because I think when they see what's in it, they'll want to. What followed was 4 hours and 12 minutes of the most extraordinary proceeding in 4,400 convocations. The Elder Council, 5 beings of such age that Mara had told him their biological memory spanned the lifespan of some civilizations, reviewed the declassification request in 40 minutes of private deliberation and returned a ruling that startled even the Veth diplomatic corps. The excluded records relevant sections would be presented to the full convocation. Immediately, Mara didn't celebrate. She just straightened her blazer, pulled her glasses down from her forehead to their actual functional position, and began. She walked that chamber through 11,000 years. Not the sanitized version, not the triumphant narrative of human achievement. The real one, the one that looked from the outside like an uninterrupted catalog of catastrophe. Ice ages that should have been extinction events. Plagues that swept through populations with terrifying efficiency. Famines, wars, volcanic winters that blocked the sun for years. A genetic bottleneck so severe, approximately 70,000 years ago, that the entire human species have been reduced to perhaps 8,000 individuals alive on Earth. A number so vanishingly small that any reasonable extinction probability model would have written humanity off as a statistical error rounding toward zero. We should have ended, she said, multiple times. By the metrics your system uses to assess species viability, we should not exist. She let that breathe. And then the silence came through this region 11,000 years ago. And every civilization in the affected zone that had achieved spacefaring capacity was gone within 3 generations. Every civilization you were monitoring as a potential future member of this convocation was gone. And one species, the least technologically significant in the entire affected zone, a species with stone tools and fire, and no concept of orbital mechanics, survived. Why? The High Archivist said. And the question was different now, stripped of ceremony, of the bureaucratic flatness it had maintained throughout the session. It was a genuine question. Our models indicate soul. 3 received equivalent extinction-level exposure. Why did your species survive when others did not? Mara was quiet for a moment, and Elias, watching her from 12 feet away, saw something in her expression that he'd been trying to name for weeks. That quality she had of carrying certainty that wasn't arrogance, conviction that wasn't performance. She believed what she was about to say in the way that people believe things they've earned through long, careful thought. Because when the silence came, she said, enough humans looked at strangers who were dying and chose to help them instead of running. Not all humans. Never all of us at once. We're not built that way, and I won't pretend otherwise. But enough. Always enough. At every critical bottleneck in our history, when the data should have pointed toward every individual for themselves as the optimal survival strategy, enough humans chose something else. We call it mercy. She paused, and from outside, from a distance, looking at our history through your classification system, it looks exactly like weakness. The chamber was very still. But here we are, she said, 11,000 years later. Still here. The only ones from that zone who are. She held up the data chip one last time. Your excluded record has been carrying the proof of that for 11,000 years. I'd like to respectfully suggest that it's time to stop excluding it. The High Archivist did not respond immediately. Instead, it turned, a slow, deliberate movement of its crystalline form, and consulted with the Elder Council behind it in a rapid exchange of bioluminescent pulses that the translation system rendered only partially, catching fragments. Unprecedented. No existing category. The survival coefficient. Then it turned back to the full chamber. The convocation, it said, in a voice that carried to every corner and through every translation filter, will recess for formal review. The human designation will be granted provisional speaking status, pending classification review. A pause, and even through the alien translation, the weight of it was unmistakable. This body has not encountered a new classification category in 900 convocations. We find that the interval was perhaps overlong. In the observer gallery, Cricket leaned 6 inches to his left and murmured, barely audible, "Did the ancient alien council just admit we surprised them?" Elias kept his face military neutral. "Don't gloat," he murmured back. "I'm not gloating. I'm marveling. Do it quietly." 12 feet away, Mara was sitting back down, and she turned just far enough to catch Elias's eye across the row. Her expression was controlled, professional, exactly what it needed to be in this room. But her eyes said, "We did it." He gave her the smallest nod he could construct. The Galactic Council found our ancient history. Now they are terrified. What they found, the stars have been watching humanity for 11,000 years. They just never bothered to say anything about it. First contact didn't arrive the way the movies promised. No blinding column of light over Manhattan. No alien mothership casting shadows across the White House lawn. No booming voice from the sky demanding to speak to whoever was in charge. Instead, it arrived at 3:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in November, when a junior signals analyst named Lieutenant Dana Reyes knocked over her third coffee of the night at the SETI Mojave Array and nearly missed the prime number sequence buried in the background noise of a pulsar she'd been charting for 8 months. She stared at her screen. 45 seconds passed. Then she said, very quietly, to no one in particular, Oh, that's not a pulsar. By Thursday, every government on Earth had been briefed. By Friday, half of them were arguing about who got to respond first. By Monday, someone leaked it, and the whole world knew. They came fast after that. The Veth Convocation fleet materialized in high orbit 11 days after first contact. 712 vessels arranged in a perfect Fibonacci spiral that caught the morning sun over the Pacific and was visible from the surface as a new constellation, cold and geometric and unmistakably deliberate. Ships that made humanity's most advanced orbital platforms look like children's toys left floating in a bathtub. Their first transmission, once the language matrices were exchanged and both sides had confirmed mutual comprehension, was not a greeting. It was a classification, biological designation, humanity, homeworld, Sol 3, assess status, pre-threshold, category 7, technological index, 1.4 on the Vardic scale, cultural complexity, mid-range, threat potential, negligible. You are hereby invited to attend the 4,400th Galactic Convocation as non-voting, non-speaking observers. Your presence is ceremonial. Conduct yourselves with appropriate deference. Do not embarrass the delegation that vouched for your attendance. The Secretary General of the United Nations read that transmission 4 times. On the 4th reading, she set it down very carefully, like it was something that might bite, and said to her aide, "Get me every senior military commander on Earth. Give me the top xenolinguists from every university. Give me a security detail that won't flinch at anything." She paused, and for the love of God, someone find me a coffee that isn't decaf. Sergeant Major Elias Voss had been in the United States Army for 19 years when the world changed forever. He'd done 2 full tours in the Helmand province back when that was still the assignment they gave to soldiers who were either very good or very unlucky, usually both. 1 rotation in Mali, a classified joint operation somewhere in the South China Sea that he was contractually and legally forbidden to discuss, though his left shoulder still remembered it on cold mornings. He'd been blown up twice, shot once, and buried under 6 feet of collapsed building for 14 hours during an earthquake relief mission in Nepal, which he categorized as the worst Tuesday of his adult life. He was the kind of soldier that military bureaucracies produced once in a generation and then weren't entirely sure what to do with. Too good in the field to promote into pure administration, too senior to keep running ground operations forever, built from whatever material they'd run out of before they made everyone else. 6'2", with a jaw like a granite shelf, and eyes the particular gray of old storm systems. His unit called him the Wall, partly for the physicality, mostly because nothing in 19 years had managed to knock him down. The HDSD assignment landed on his desk on a Wednesday morning. Human Diplomatic Security Detail. 12 soldiers drawn from every branch of service, specifically selected to provide physical security for Earth's diplomatic delegation at the Galactic Convocation. His CEO had slid the folder across a desk, said, "Congratulations, you've been volunteered," and left before Elias could formulate an objection. He reported to Peterson Space Force Base and met his detail in a briefing room that smelled like industrial floor cleaner and institutional anxiety. 11 soldiers, 2 more Army, 3 Marines with a particular expression of people who'd been told this wasn't combat, but were reserving judgment, a pair of Navy SEALs who looked like they'd walked in from Fitness magazine, 1 Air Force pararescueman who introduced himself only as Cricket and had already found the room's coffee supply, 2 intelligence officers from the newly formed Alien Contact Division, and 1 Space Force technical specialist who kept checking something on her tablet, with the focused concern of a person watching a slow-motion car accident. And then there was the civilian. Dr. Mara Osei walked into that briefing room 7 minutes late. carrying a tablet loaded with what she'd later describe as 6 months of Veth linguistic architecture modeling, wearing a charcoal blazer over a faded NASA t-shirt that said, "I need my space," in letters that had been washed approximately 200 times. She had her hair pulled back with what appeared to be a mechanical pencil serving as a hairpin, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular expression of someone who hadn't been sleeping enough but had stopped noticing. University of Ghana, Elias had read in her file. Then Oxford, then MIT. 3 years at the Earth Veth Interface Bureau, where she'd built the first functional translation matrix for Veth standard from scratch using only the original prime number transmission and a methodology she'd apparently invented herself. 34 years old, no military background, expert in 4 Earth languages, and now, apparently, one alien one. She set her tablet on the table, looked around at the assembled soldiers with the brisk efficiency of someone who had a lot to cover and limited time to cover it, and said, "You're the security detail?" "Yes, ma'am," Elias said. She looked at him specifically for a moment, the kind of direct, assessing look that didn't bother with social politeness, and said, "Have any of you had prior exposure to species with Gestalt memory architecture?" 11 soldiers stared at her. Cricket lowered his coffee. "No," Elias said. "Right." She opened her tablet. "Then I need about 20 minutes of your time before we discuss operational protocols, because what we're walking into is significantly more complicated than the briefing document suggests." She wasn't wrong. She turned back to the chamber, and outside, 11,000 years of history settled into a new shape. The shape of a species that had never been as small as anyone thought, and had finally made the galaxy look at the proof. Later, much later, after the recess, after the formal reclassification hearing, after the Veth Elder Council issued the first new species classification ruling in 9 centuries, an Earth delegation was escorted back to their transport with considerably more ceremony than they'd arrived with. Elias found Mara on the observation deck of the shuttle, standing at the viewport with her blazer off and her glasses back on her forehead, watching the Veth fleet recede behind them. He stood beside her, not at parade rest, just beside her. "You knew," he said, "before we went in. You knew it would work." "I knew the argument was sound," she said. "I didn't know if sound was enough. It was. This time." She looked at him sideways. "The galaxy is very large, Elias. And we just told all 400 species in that chamber that humanity has a survival mechanism they've never seen before." She paused. Some of them looked scared. "Good," he said simply. She blinked. Then, for the first time since he'd met her, through 6 weeks of briefings and late nights, and a moment in front of 700 alien warships that should have broken anyone, she laughed. Short, genuine, a little surprised at itself. "Good," she repeated. "Species that are scared of you negotiate," he said. "Species that underestimate you don't bother." She was quiet for a moment. The stars moved slowly past the viewport. The same stars that had been watching humanity for 11,000 years, keeping their own counsel. "Thank you," she said. She seemed to search for the right framing. "For standing in my back in there." "That's the job," he said. "Elias." "Yeah. That's not what I meant, and you know it." He didn't know it. He'd known it for a while. "Yeah," he said again, differently. "I know." She looked back at the stars. He looked at her, and somewhere in the vast, newly reconfigured galaxy outside that viewport, 11,000 years of history breathed out slowly, like something that had been held too long finally, carefully, let go.